Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Tuesday, August the 3rd, 2021. Some breaking news here. This is from the Daily Mail. President Joe Biden called on Governor Andrew Cuomo to resign Tuesday afternoon, echoing calls made by other Democratic congressional leaders. I think he should resign, Biden said, after telling reporters that he stood by his previous statement that if the investigation found accusations of sexual harassment against Cuomo were credible, the New York Democrat should step aside. The president answered, "Let's take one thing at a time here," when asked if Cuomo should be impeached and removed from office. He also demurred when asked if Cuomo should be prosecuted. Cuomo has refused to resign and is contesting a damning report from Attorney General Letitia James that found he did sexually harass 11 women. Cuomo claims it omits facts and is a political attack on him, despite growing calls to step down and the increasing likelihood of impeachment. Cuomo had used a photo of Biden in his slideshow of touchy-feely behavior, explaining it away as being just how he is. When asked about being included, Biden replied, "Look, I'm not going to fly-spec this," whatever the hell that means. He added, "I'm sure there are some embraces that were totally innocent, but apparently the Attorney General decided there were things that weren't." Is Joe Biden really the best person to weigh in on whether any other politician should be canceled for inappropriate sexual behavior? I don't think so. What I find strange or even outrageous about this whole business is that there are credible reports that Andrew Cuomo's behavior during COVID-19, that is to say, forcing infected people into nursing homes in New York State, led to the deaths of somewhere between 10 and 20,000 people. But apparently this is the hill that Andrew Cuomo is going to die on. Not for killing people, but for groping people. I suppose that shows us, what we consider important today. I mean, killing people, yeah, well, come on, it's comes with a job, right? I was thinking about Joe Biden and how we've gotten used to this informality, this sort of aggressive informality. He's Joe Biden. He's not Joseph Biden. Joseph is an excellent name, but it's too formal, is it? So he's Joe, ordinary Joe, just plain Joe, like he's our buddy. Well, he's not our buddy, is he? Not that long ago, he'd been known as Joseph Biden or Joseph R. Biden Jr., but not Joe, because that would assume a level of familiarity that we do not have with the man. Back in 1976, when Jimmy Carter was elected president, people still commented on this. Why is he Jimmy Carter? Why not James Carter? Again, guy must be our pal, right? He's Jimmy. Everyone likes Jimmy, right? Same thing with Bill Clinton. Not William Clinton, but Bill Clinton. Oh, yeah. You all like Bill Clinton, right? Because he's called Bill. Oh, William. William is just outrageously formal. But Bill, no, just such a likable fellow. Remember dignity? Here's a piece from nationalfile.com by Gabriel Keene. Openly lesbian black U.S. shot putter Raven Sanders aggressively shook her buttocks at the camera in a twerk maneuver after failing to record a gold medal winning performance at the Tokyo Olympics this weekend, and gave a lengthy speech about intersectionality, alphabet people, politics, and racial justice at her silver medal acceptance ceremony. Sanders, sporting a neon green and purple buzz cut, made an X sign with her wrists at the podium for her silver medal, explaining, quote, "It's the intersection of where all people who are oppressed meet." Yes, this woman certainly seems oppressed, doesn't she? Given how fearsomely ugly she is, The fact that anyone actually even knows about her, and she's acclaimed for her performance in a sport that no one pays any attention to except every 4 years at the Olympics. Yes, that's certainly a proof of oppression. Asked what her mission was at the Olympics, Saunders declared to be me, to not apologize, to show younger people that no matter how many boxes they try to fit you in, you can be you and you can accept it. People tried to tell me not to do tattoos and piercings and all that, but look at me now, and I'm poppin'. If not for sending a text to an old therapist, I would not be here right now, Saunders said. All these things weighing on me for 22 years, I was finally able to process it. I was finally able to separate Raven from the Hulk. She added that, I really think my generation doesn't care. Shout out to all my Black people. Shout out to all my alphabet people community. Shout out to everybody dealing with mental health. Because at the end of the day, we understand that it's bigger than us, and it's bigger than the powers that be. Gong Lijiao of China took home the gold medal in the women's shot put, beating runners-up Saunders and New Zealand's Valerie Adams. In further Olympic news, Gwen Berry, this is from Jared Greenspan at the New York Post. Gwen Berry failed to medal during the women's hammer throw finals on Tuesday. Berry finished in 11th place out of 12 competitors, registering a distance of 71.35 meters. The 32-year-old caused a stir during the medal ceremony at the Olympic trials in June. After winning a bronze medal during the event, Berry faced the stands rather than the American flag, holding up a shirt that read "Activist Athlete." Afterward, Berry said that she was pissed that the Star-Spangled Banner played during the celebration. If you know your history, you know the full song of the national anthem, Berry said on Black News Channel. The third paragraph speaks to slaves in America, our blood being slain all over. Yes, all over the floor. Really? Is that what it's about? In July, before the Olympics commenced, Berry pledged to represent the oppressed people should she win a medal in Tokyo, adding, "That's been my message for the last 3 years." 2 years ago, Berry staged a protest on the medals podium at the Pan American Games, raising her fist during the ceremony. Oh, and in yet more Olympic news, this is from WayneDupree.com, Missy Crane. Well, the woke women's soccer team can kiss their dreams of winning gold goodbye. As a matter of fact, they might just be kissing any medal hopes bye-bye after a stunning upset loss to Team Canada. NPR reported on this stunning loss, saying in an upset, the top-ranked U.S. women's soccer team lost its semifinal game to Canada 1-0 at the Tokyo Olympics, pushing it out of contention for a gold medal. The World Cup champs could still take bronze if they win their next game. The game was scoreless at the half. The U.S. team's goalie, Alyssa Naher, had to come out of the game in the 30th minute after colliding with U.S. defender Julie Ertz. Team USA said she landed awkwardly on her right leg. Maybe it would have been smarter for Team USA to focus more on the actual sport of soccer than the sport of liberal wokeness. I mean, if there was a medal for being social justice warriors, Team USA would have taken every gold medal in the joint. But alas, this was a sporting event, not a political rally, and as a result, little Ms. Purple Hair fell on her face. It's a sad day when the teams representing us at the Olympics are such America haters and divisive jerks that Americans are literally cheering when they lose. But that's what Megan Rapinoe and her team of angry cat ladies have done. They've made it all about them and their politics, and now they're getting exactly what they deserve. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Dan and Palcasso 88, Dawn from Beyond, Matt Beck, and Run. Dan says Biden scolding Cuomo is interesting. I guess it smells one to no one. Hello to Head McNeck. It is good to be back. Let's see. Chococan 666 says so they have a new flag. It's in the style of the new South African flag. The field is the alphabet people rainbow, and the chevron is the trans thing. Ultra Testosterone says Cuomo grabbed a few shoulders and said, "Sweetheart." Yeah, I don't know. Andrew Cuomo is physiognomy is real, right? You take one look at this man and you realize just how nasty he is. I mean, he can't even pretend to be less ugly. But on the other hand, considering that he is still governor of New York, despite the fact that he is liable for the deaths of somewhere between 10 to 20,000 people, I suppose it just shows you the power of brazening it out. Jogakin 666 says, are we the only team that has athletes with these idiotic hair colors? Well, Team Canada in soccer has a woman. Well, I don't know. Am I misgendering her by calling her a woman? I believe she's called Quinn. She just has one name, and everyone gets very nervous how to describe this person. Let's see. Here's a story from Outsports. As North America was either sleeping or slowly yawning itself into the throes of a new workday on Wednesday. What? That's the opening to a story, is it? Soccer teams representing Canada and Japan played an early evening tilt on a sunny midsummer night in Sapporo, Japan. Team Canada tied Team Japan 1-1, but the player wearing number 5 for Canada made Olympic history. Quinn became the first out non-binary transgender athlete to compete in the Olympic Games. Quinn, who plays for the NWSL's Ole Reign, was already known to soccer fans. Yes, all 17 of them in North America. They are a seasoned, scrappy, and world-class midfielder. And last August, they revealed something greater than their position on the pitch or their stats. No, that's not exactly true, because the only reason that we know about this Quinn person is because she, they, it, or whatever is representing a country in the Olympic Games. So Quinn posted on Instagram, coming out is hard, all caps, and kind of BS. I know for me, it's something I'll be doing over again for the rest of my life. As I've lived as an openly trans person with the people I love most for many years, I did always wonder when I'd come out publicly. Instagram is a weird space. I wanted to encapsulate the feelings I had towards my trans identity in one post, but that's not really why anyone is on here, including myself. So instead, all caps, I want to be visible to queer folks who don't see people like them on their feed. I know it saved my life years ago. I want to challenge cis folks. If you don't know what cis means, that's probably you, 3 exclamation points, to be better allies. It's a process, and I know it won't be perfect, but if I can encourage you to start, then it's something. 1, put your pronouns in your bio. 2, follow, listen to other trans NB voices. 3, practice using gender-neutral pronouns with friends in a mirror. 4, vote. 5, start to catch yourself making assumptions about people in public/bathroom/any space. Oh, dear. What does that mean? That sounds rather horrifying, actually. Let's see. William Hicks says, well, Kevin, a few months ago after hearing your review, I bought the Criterion Collection DVD of Come and See, but didn't watch until yesterday, a sublime film. Well, I appreciate that. Of course, I was talking about Canal on Friday, and I suppose you could compare the films. And one of the ways in which Come and See is different from Canal in that in the last act of Come and See, it becomes definitely surreal. There are things like that German officer woman eating lobster at the front in Belarus, which clearly did not happen. Let's see. Pitsky says KMG Sirens Mayhem. That's entertainment. Metal Mike says Decepticons and Transformers more than meets the eye. True Greenbeard says, obviously cis was coined as a slight against straights, as in sissy. Chokokin 666, whose cops are bigger cowards, German, Aussie, US? Well, if you've seen the video of a German cop punching a child because the child is distressed because his mother has been assaulted by the cops. Yeah, okay, Germans, you win. All right? You're the toughest cops in the whole world. Okay. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. PayPal co-founder David Sachs warns that the financial giant is creating a de facto no-buy list by banning people for their opinions, a move that will actually increase extremism in the long term. In an article posted on Barry Weiss's Substack newsletter, the investor explains how PayPal's role has been completely reversed from its initial objective of helping ordinary people not be dependent on large financial institutions to start a business. Sachs writes, but now PayPal is turning its back on its original mission. It is now leading the charge to restrict participation by those it deems unworthy. The entrepreneur argues that by partnering with the likes of the Anti-Defamation League and the SPLC, PayPal has allowed itself to be used as a tool by far-left activist outfits to center ideological opposition. I have no desire to defend genuinely hateful or extremist groups, writes Sachs. Indeed, when I was COO at PayPal, we regularly worked with law enforcement to restrict illegal activity on our platform. But we are talking about something very different here, shutting down people and organizations that express views that are entirely lawful, even if they are unpopular with Silicon Valley. Glenn Greenwald tweets, the ADL is a highly politicized group, completely liberal and aligned with the DNC, just a tad more pro-Israel in their focus, but otherwise no differences. This is yet another union between establishment liberalism and big tech to control and censor the internet. He points to White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki's pernicious announcement that the Biden administration is working with Facebook to directly censor information related to COVID-19, and her insistence that other platforms should mirror Facebook's censorship policies at the behest of the government. The suppression of speech by the government is blatantly unconstitutional under the First Amendment, writes Sachs, noting that PayPal is now a fully signed-up member of Silicon Valley's purge of undesirables. Now PayPal has gone much further, creating the economic equivalent of a no-fly list with the ADL's assistance. If history is any guide, other fintech companies will soon follow suit. As we saw in the case of speech restrictions, the political monoculture that prevails among employees of these companies will create pressure for all of them to act as a bloc. When someone mistakenly lands on the no-fly list, they can at least sue or petition the government for redress. But when your name lands on a no-buy list created by a consortium of private fintech companies, to whom can you appeal? Sachs highlights how the monopolies created by fintech giants and the way they act in unison when banning individuals or groups is literally creating a society where dissidents will find it difficult to even function in society. Kicking people off social media deprives them of the right to speak in our increasingly online world, Sachs writes. Locking them out of the financial economy is worse. It deprives them of the right to make a living. We have seen how cancel culture can obliterate one's ability to earn an income, but now the canceled might find themselves without a way to pay for goods and services. Sachs concludes by noting that the same resentment against elites that handed Trump victory in 2016 is merely being recreated by Silicon Valley, while their stated policy goal of reducing extremism is actually having the opposite effect. Sachs writes, if we continue down this path, a far more dangerous demagogue could emerge. I implore my successors at PayPal and other big tech companies to stop throwing kindling on the fires of populism by locking people out of the online public square and the modern web-based economy. Silenced voices and empty stomachs are fuel for the very extremism you claim to oppose. Sachs warns that deplatforming is creating hordes of desperate people denied a voice and livelihood who will simply vote for an autocratic dictator the first chance they get. And here's a piece by Julie Kelly at AmericanGreatness.com. Harry Dunn began his testimony last week before the January 6th Select Committee by asking for a moment of silence in honor of Brian Sicknick. The U.S. Capitol Police officer testifying under oath claimed his fallen colleague died from injuries he sustained in the line of duty defending the capital of our beloved democracy. The committee members and the audience complied. Dunn's remark is quite simply a lie. Brian Sicknick, 42, died on January 7th of a stroke caused by blood clots near his brain, a tragic and untimely death that the District of Columbia medical examiner did not tie to the events of the previous day. It is just the latest example of how the U.S. Capitol Police, a federal agency funded by American taxpayers, has taken a leading role in fabricating the mythology of January the 6th. Top brass and rank-and-file officers such as Dunn intentionally continue to mislead the public about what happened that day, especially through the falsehood that Trump fanatics killed a cop during the Capitol protest. Officer Sicknick was responding to the riots on Wednesday, January the 6th, 2021, at the U.S. Capitol and was injured while physically engaging with protesters, according to a press release issued January the 7th. He returned to his division office and collapsed. He was taken to a local hospital where he succumbed to his injuries. Tuesday's testimony by Dunn and fellow officer Aquilino Gonell added to the long list of theatrics and political stunts involving Capitol Police officers related to January the 6th. For the past several months, this rogue agency has acted as House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's political enforcers rather than as an objective law enforcement agency. USCP captured at least 14,000 hours of video from January 6th, but refuses to make the footage available to the public. The agency is also attempting to withhold recordings from defense counsel and the news media. An affidavit filed in March by the department's general counsel confirmed the footage will remain, quote, in the legal control of USCP. As part of the legislative branch, the USCP is exempted from Freedom of Information Act rules. No one can legally demand access to the tapes. The agency insists the massive trove of video must remain under seal in order to prevent would-be insurrectionists who might wish to attack the Capitol again. That, of course, is subterfuge. USCP is working hand in hand with Democrats to shape the narrative of January 6th while actively concealing video evidence that could expose the truth, such as recordings that show USCP and DC Metropolitan Police officers attacking the crowd assembled outside with explosive devices and tear gas to provoke a violent response. Which is why outlandish public testimony from Dunn and Gonell can go unchallenged. Not only does the agency control surveillance video taken on January 6th, but there is no footage captured by their own officers. Why? Unlike most cops across the country, USCP officers do not wear body cameras. So USCP officers can make any accusation they want, and there is practically no way to refute it. Deniability is wholly in the hands of the U.S. Capitol Police, which is exactly how they want it. For example, Dunn repeatedly has claimed that Trump supporters taunted him with racial slurs during the protest. I got called an N-word a couple dozen times per day protecting this building, Dunn told Good Morning America in March. Is this America? He said the same thing during last week's committee hearing after telling some protesters inside the Capitol that he voted for Joe Biden. Why would that even come up? Dunn described the alleged reaction, quote, that prompted a torrent of racial epithets. One woman in a pink MAGA shirt yelled, "You hear that, guys? This N-word voted for Joe Biden." Then the crowd, perhaps around 20 people, joined in screaming, "Boo, effing N-word. No one had ever called me an N-word while wearing the uniform of a Capitol Police officer." Well, as they say, video or it never happened. Now, there's a chance what Dunn described really happened, and if it did, it was an ugly display from vile people that should be roundly condemned. But it's hard to believe, given how the USCP continues to help Democrats demonize Trump supporters over January 6th, that the agency hasn't yet released video clips of it happening. After all, USCP still maintains ultimate control of the footage. Nearly 7 months later, USCP partisans haven't found that exchange on tape. Color me skeptical. Ditto for Officer Gonell. The former veteran referred to protesters as traitors. Nobody has been charged with treason, and claimed what he saw on January 6th was worse than what he saw in combat. I was more afraid working at the Capitol than during my entire Army deployment to Iraq, Gonell told the committee. Gonell criticized a handful of congressmen for holding a press conference outside the Justice Department last Tuesday, to protest the pretrial detention of innocent January 6 defendants. It's pathetic, Gunnell, an immigrant from the Dominican Republic, said. They shouldn't be elected officials anymore. Gunnell also said he was gravely injured during the chaos. I sustained injuries to both of my hands, my left shoulder, my left calf, and my right foot. I have already undergone fusion surgery on my foot, and I was just told that I need surgery on my left shoulder. He's been on leave from the department for 6 months. But there is no video publicly available to show how Gunnell was injured. In fact, there's no recording of him at all. This seems odd. The Justice Department, as a coalition of news organizations recently noted, often publicly post clips favorable to their side. Why hasn't the agency or Justice Department posted the footage showing the attack on Gunnell? Further, no one has been charged with assaulting Gunnell. More than 100 protesters have been charged so far with attacking police officers on January 6th, but not one has been arrested or charged for injuring Gunnell. Protesters who allegedly assaulted D.C. Metropolitan Officers Michael Fanone and Daniel Hodges, both of whom participated in Pelosi's show trial last week, have been identified and charged. Gunnell said he thought he would die. So where are his alleged attackers? But as usual, facts and proof don't matter. Journalists and commentators accepted the officer's unsubstantiated testimony without question. Writing in The Hill, Andrew McCarthy, who initially reported Brian Sicknick had been murdered, applauded the devastating testimony of 4 heroic police officers. McCarthy called their accounts unimpeachable, while criticizing Pelosi for refusing to seat Representatives James Jordan and Jim Banks, tireless Trump apologists, according to McCarthy, on her select committee. Yes. And, oh yes, and in more censorship news, this is from Eric Lendrum at American Greatness. 2 of the largest news publications in the country, the Associated Press and Reuters, have teamed up with one of the leading tech giants, Twitter, in a partnership to crack down on so-called misinformation and elevate credible information, the Daily Caller reports. Twitter confirmed the new alliance in a blog post, saying that the 2 publications would be responsible for identifying misleading information and to help Twitter expand its efforts to mediate trending stories, especially where facts are in dispute. The websites will also help Twitter staff whenever they lack, quote, sufficient expertise or access to a high enough volume of reputable reporting. This program is just part of our ongoing efforts to help people understand the conversation happening on our service, the Twitter blog post continued. People experience a range of public conversations on Twitter every day, and we're committed to continuing our work to elevate credible information and context. Tom Janwazewski, as spokesman for Associated Press, said that the AP aims to expand the reach of factual journalism. Reuters' Hazel Baker made the questionable claim that, quote, trust, accuracy, and impartiality at the heart of what Reuters does every day, and that those values drive our commitment to stopping the spread of misinformation, unquote. Twitter, along with other big tech platforms, have significantly increased their efforts to crack down on political dissent in recent months, most notably by permanently banning President Donald Trump in January, while he was still the sitting president of the United States. Other platforms, such as YouTube and Facebook, have either outright banned or attached warning labels to content that raises doubts about the 2020 presidential election, the efficiency of coronavirus restrictions, and other controversial subjects. You know, when I used to write opinion columns, I thought it was taken as a given that, you know, people could read my stuff and they could believe it or not believe it or agree with it or not agree with it. You know, that maybe you knew who I was, and, you know, that would lead you one direction or the other. The idea that, oh, we're going to stamp this with true or false. Well, who died and made you God that you determine what the truth is? And in insanity news, this is a real story that I'm not making up. It's by someone called Riley Black in Slate. And the headline is, I'm a furry. Netflix's Sexy Beast misses the entire point of dressing up like an animal. It's about showing who you are, not obscuring it. And there's a picture of a person, I don't know whether it's a man or woman, who is wearing a dolphin head. And this is one of the most sinister things that I've ever seen. And Riley Black begins, it was around the time that the praying mantis was contemplating doing a stomach slide down a bowling alley lane that I began to question my choices. I was 5 episodes into Sexy Beasts, a dating show in which slim young people are outfitted with animal heads and sent to various locations, a bowling alley, an axe-throwing range, a Land Rover test course, to attempt to flirt from beneath producer-issued get-ups. Each episode focuses on one contestant who goes on dates with 3 others, and by the end of the runtime selects a person whose face they've never seen to be their sexy beast, at which point the prosthetics come off. Contestants are not always dressed as animals. There are trolls and rocks and witches too, but the intent is the same. By masking people's faces, the show claims to simulate what dating would be like if you had to base choices on personality alone. Contestants navigate stilted questions from one another like, do you believe in love? Would you still be attracted to me if I weighed 300 pounds? I can answer that one. No. At best, the series is a container of puffed cheese balls. You know it's not good for you or even particularly satisfying, but at some point you've had so much you might as well finish it. The Netflix-hosted mess is going for shock value with the costumes, and early reactions to the show's trailer on social media were predictably sprinkled with ha-ha, ew, furries jabs. My editor assigned me to review the show in part because I'm a furry, but Sexy Beast shares far more in common with late-night staples like Blind Date than the fandom known for queer animal people with paws and claws. As I watched episode after episode of stilted romance, I kept thinking furries do all of this way better. Part of the difference is the setting. Furry is a fandom by itself, for itself. That's created by the people in it, not an effort to gain up Netflix subscribers. Yes, people don't pretend to be animals for sexual purposes because they're looking for attention. No, no, no. That is the furthest thing from their mind. But to continue, furries gather in online communities. Yes, online communities. That's pretty much a standard definition of toxicity. Massive conventions that attract thousands each year and local art jams. What does that mean, an art jam? Is that a real thing? In addition to the artists and fursuit makers who've made fandom their career, there are scientists, emergency workers, software engineers, doctors, lawyers, and more, all brought together by the fun and fascination about having an animal alter ego or fursona. I can't believe I just spoke that word. That's more or less a human with animal characteristics. We're a different breed than the makeup-daubed contestants of Sexy Beasts, down to the core. Humans have been obsessed about the intersection of the human and the animal since the Ice Age, at least. Today, we're surrounded by all sorts of human-animal remixes, from breakfast cereals to sports teams. I have no idea what that means. My own trip down the furry rabbit hole was a winding one. Oh, I bet it was, Ryan. As a child of the 1980s and 90s, anthropomorphized animals were everywhere, from my favorite childhood book, The Saggy Baggy Elephant, to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Not everything anthropomorphic is furry, of course. What is and isn't is defined by whether it's produced and engaged by a certain community of adults, not whether it's sex-related. Yes, adults, exactly. During my teenage years, I accidentally bumped into the furry fandom proper as I was getting online in the days of dial-up. But the kink-shaming and stereotypes kept me from talking to anyone about it until I happened to meet furries through other channels. In 2016, I attended my first convention, started writing furry stories, because of course you did, and began to jump from convention to help friends with their merch booths, finding a wellspring of incredibly talented people. Yeah, there was some after dark fun too, and that's as much as I want to talk about furries. Let's talk about oppression. Now, Australia has gone insane. Australians are a lot like Canadians. in that they were once considered some of the toughest men in the world, but now they are amongst the world's most effeminate. And I've been joking for several weeks about a contest that has broken out between Canada and Australia as to which is the most effeminate country in the world. Well, it's over. Canada has lost. Australia has won. Congratulations, Australia. This is by Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Australians who merely post anti-lockdown information online could face fines of up to $11,000 under a draconian new piece of legislation. Under the proposal, which is being pushed by the opposition in New South Wales, protest organizers would be fined a whopping $20,000, and people who attend would be fined $5,500. However, the law would punish people sharing information on social media about illegal rallies and inciting others to illegally attend, even more harshly, hitting them with $11,000 fines. The onerous fines are intended to neutralize a protest movement that has grown in recent weeks over New South Wales imposing yet another brutal lockdown on its citizens, which is now being enforced by military occupation of Sydney. Shadow Police Minister Walt Secord said the massive signs are needed to throw the book at these idiots who spread misinformation and lies along with the Delta variant. Police Commissioner Mick Fuller warned of online chatter about a possible second protest this Saturday, using rhetoric that is usually reserved for terrorists planning a deadly attack. Fines for not wearing masks, which are now compulsory even outdoors. Do these people have any idea of how vast the atmosphere is? Are also set to rise to $500. Minister for Police and Emergency Services David Elliott even bragged about how many calls, a total of over 15,000, had been received from people reporting on others for attending illegal protests. The 15,000 calls to Crime Stoppers is a clear message to the government that the community expects action, said Elliott. As we previously highlighted, Australia has been placed on one of the most authoritarian lockdowns out of any major developed country. A pregnant woman was arrested in her own home for planning an anti-lockdown protest on Facebook, while the state also gave itself the power to seize children from their parents and enter homes without a warrant under COVID-19 rules. The chief health officer of New South Wales even went so far as to tell Australians that they shouldn't engage with conversation with each other, even if they're wearing masks, in order to reduce the transmission of COVID. Australian MP Frank Pangelo also recently asserted that unvaccinated people will need to be controlled and restricted by the authorities. It was brought to my attention that this woman, Claire Lehman, who is the editor of Quillette, an Australian journal, has gone completely nuts over COVID-19. The last time I checked, 2 people had died in Australia in the whole of this year. 2 people. Here's what Claire Lehman, famous liberal, has to say. I suspect that a lot of the low-grade anti-vax rhetoric emanating from right-of-center circles, particularly American, is not actually grounded in genuine belief, but a feeling of tribal affiliation. Proudlessly rootless, Claire Lehman is. The more that this rhetoric snowballs, the harder it will be for right-of-center influencers to stay mute on the topic, and they will feel they need to offer an opinion in line with their group out of social necessity, a reputational cascade. The phenomenon of informational and reputational cascades reinforcing one another in an ongoing feedback loop is one we've seen play out before. This woman obviously has no sense of irony, speaking about informational and reputational cascades. Remember when everyone jumped on the BLM wagon in 2020? But this time it's affecting the right, not the woke left. And yeah, Claire Lehman, somebody sent me some tweet that she'd made about her sexual habits a couple of years ago. And I thought, golly, I wish I hadn't read this. Why would anyone confess such a thing? Well, that's the way we live now. Let's go back to the chat. Picasso88 says, I was shocked by laymen. I thought Quillette was semi-right wing. Well, they're liberal, classical liberal, and scratch a liberal, and you will find an authoritarian. Contiki Roulette says, that's more symptoms than the other 6 people I personally know tested positive. They had no symptoms whatsoever. Contracu says, in undergrad, my assigned freshman year roommate was a self-described anthropomorph, i.e. furry. The experience was every bit as awkward and eye-opening as you could imagine it to be. Oscar Toe says, hey, Kevin, thanks for recommending Birth by Jonathan Glazer. I will be thinking about that movie for a long time. Well, thank you. And it is a beautiful, beautiful movie. True Greenbird says, Conversation Police. Jim Bowden, KMG, you're my favorite intellectual Canadian streamer, but like almost all streamers, which is understandable, you do not discuss the chosen tribe much. Why? Too powerful? I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, you know. I pretty much had my career ruined 20 years ago for getting involved in this question, and I'd rather just avoid it. For the record, and I'm not being insincere in any regard here, I have nothing against the Jews, but they form a pressure group, don't they? And as such, they should be just as susceptible to criticism as any other pressure group. I understand that that's a controversial opinion, but, you know, there you go. Head McNeck says, I'd never been able to imagine what Soviet citizens of the early 90s felt right before the fall until this year. We've become a nation of lies. We swim in narrative vomit. From William Hicks again, Kevin, I asked last week but didn't catch a response. Do you have a plan for when YouTube screws you over? Have you looked at Rumble or others that have live streaming? Hope it doesn't happen. But yeah, well, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. Yeah, I'll just say that. Texas Feral Hog says, beware of Trump FB lawsuit outcome becoming case law. We're being set up here. Trump has pride of ownership of vaccines that need to be shown in court. It's not living up to their billing. You know, it's funny that Kamala Harris said a few months ago that she was not going to take the vaccine if Trump told her to take the vaccine. And now she's one of the people demanding that everybody take the vaccine. They're the same vaccines. Well, they're not vaccines, actually. You know, they're experimental gene therapy. Oh, by the way, Andrew Coyne, leading American conservative, railing against those that won't be jabbed, said in a column in the Globe and Mail that it's not experimental and it's not gene therapy. These people lie without compunction anymore. In fact, if lying was a crime, Andrew Coyne would be in prison. And, oh, yes. You notice that, who was it? Glenn Greenwald pointed out today that suddenly all of these people, all these experts about Hungary have come out of the woodwork. And they all have very strong opinions about Hungary. And it all happens on the same day. You know, like David Frum. It's almost as if a memo was sent out. Well, here's a memo that was sent out last week. Here's a piece in Maclean's by Scott Gilmore, who I understand to be an NGO creep who is married to a Canadian cabinet minister. Vaccinations, no more carrot. Bring out the stick. Rewards and bribes aren't working. It's increasingly clear there's only one way out of this pandemic and the approaching fourth wave. Go fourth wave. There's an inevitable moment, familiar to all parents and babysitters, when you realize that reasoning with a toddler will only get you so far. Soothing tones and patience may work for a while, but eventually the child once again picks up their bowl, looks you straight in the eye, and slowly pours their cereal onto the floor. You see, a total lack of respect for people who disagree with them. We are children having tantrums because we don't want to be exposed to experimental gene therapy. Canada has arrived at this moment, and the toddlers in question are the approximately 20% of Canadians who have yet to get even one dose of a vaccine. Just as we began to think the COVID pandemic was coming to an end, a fourth wave has arisen, due almost entirely to the unvaccinated. Lie. As a result, restrictions are coming back, masks are returning, and our short, precious summer looks like it may even be shorter yet. Even those of us who are fully vaccinated, good for you, Scott, are being forced to mask back up. Really? Who's forcing you? This is because we have now learned that the new and deadly Delta variant can still be carried and transmitted by the immunized. Okay, it just, again, one more time. So it turns out that the jabs aren't working, that people who have been fully vaccinated are becoming infected with COVID-19, and they're infecting other people. So the solution then is to have everyone vaccinated? Golly, that is some impressive logic there. Gilmore continues, the most popular strategy adopted by various levels of government in Canada has been to deploy a combination of information and rewards to encourage vaccination. This has worked well so far. In fact, as of this week, Canada's vaccination rate is the highest among G7 countries. But this carrot approach appears to be reaching its limit. Our daily vaccination rate is dropping off a cliff. We are now administering 1/3 the number of doses per day compared to a month ago. Those who remain unvaccinated will not be lured into line. We need a stick. Who are these people? The University of Sydney. Why, Sydney, that would be in Australia, the most effeminate country in the world, conducted a study of the unvaccinated in Australia, Canada, the UK, and the US. It found that, in comparison to the population at large, these people tend to have less agreeable personalities, be less cooperative with others, more selfish, and more extroverted. In the vernacular, the term is assholes. Yeah, that's not me. This is Scott Gilmore. Adding to this mix, we also have the gullible, people who believe Anthony Fauci created the pandemic. I'll just pause on that. Or that Bill Gates is putting tracking clips in the vaccines. And there are, of course, the misled. It's not a coincidence that Fox News viewers are far less likely to believe the vaccine works, according to a recent Axios Ipsos poll. These people screaming, why aren't you vaccinated? I want to go back to 2003 and what you were saying about weapons of mass destruction. How many of you people bought that obvious lie? Close to 100% of you? Like David Frum, he just didn't buy the lie, he was selling the lie. How many Americans died because David Frum helped to sucker that country into a war based on a lie? How is it possible that he has any kind of public career anymore? According to Gilmore, facts patiently explained in infographics and with simpler and simpler sound bites. Oh, yes, talking down to the stupid people. Do not reach these people. And if they do, they're drowned out by the cynical clamoring of conservative media. Worse yet, it is a well-documented psychological irony that people who hold an unpopular opinion will only dig in further when presented with evidence to the contrary. Again, self-knowledge close to zero. And bribes won't work either. Officials in Ohio tried to lure people to vaccination centers with lottery prizes and college scholarships, much like the people in the country of India who were sterilized after they were offered transistor radios by Indira Gandhi's government. They didn't tell the men exactly what they were in for, but come on, everyone loves a transistor radio, right? Researchers from the Boston University School of Medicine found rates actually declined after the offer of bribes. Golly, I wonder why that might be. Because if this vaccine, well, it's free, first of all, it's everywhere. And if it is so very safe and efficacious, why do they need to bribe people in order to get it? Could Gilmore really be so stupid that he doesn't understand why people would be suspicious of that scenario? A survey released by the Kaiser Family Foundation found in June that among the unvaccinated, only 9% would consider getting the jab when offered $20. Even $100 would only sway 14%. However, that same survey revealed that the holdouts are far more motivated if they were denied access to large family gatherings, 40%, or flights, 41%. For these people, threats work better than bribes and patient reassurance. Here lies the solution to finally bringing this pandemic to an end. To begin with, now that the vast majority of Canadians are vaccinated, we should close the airport's gates to those who aren't. If you want to fly, you need a vaccine. A form of this already exists in some places. If you want to board a flight to northern Manitoba, I can't imagine why anyone would want to do that, for example. The same rules should be applied to trains, concerts, even restaurants. We could even go so far as to impose it as a requirement for interprovincial travel. This approach is already working in Europe. When French President Emmanuel Macron announced that vaccine passes would be required to enter restaurants, hospitals, shopping centers, or to take a train, 2.2 million appointments were booked within the following 48 hours. In Italy, 5-hour-long lines formed immediately after similar restrictions were announced. This might require some form of standardized certification beyond the printouts most of us have now. All that would require is a visit to a vaccination center, a doctor, or possibly even City Hall, where you could show some ID and your proof of vaccination and then be giving something similar to a temporary driver's license. There would be no need for a picture, just your name and birth date on some difficult to replicate paper stock. This, like so many things with the pandemic, should have been something our public health officials had anticipated and prepared for months ago. Forward from public health officials, basically imagining a police state. Others have warned this will create a segregated country. Randy Hillier, an Ontario politician infamous for being even too much for Doug Ford's Conservatives, claims that withholding access to the unvaccinated is akin to Nazi policies and one step removed from extermination. I could point out that everything in our society already contains elements of segregation: no shoes, no shirt, no service, but there's simply no point in trying to reason with idiots or frauds who might believe this nonsense, and I won't try here. We need to begin treating the vaccine holdouts as the fools they are. It is not fair that reasonable and responsible Canadians should pay the price for their deadly selfishness. No more soothing tones and patience. Time for the stick. Yes, again, to repeat, it turns out that the jabs are not preventing people from getting infected by COVID-19 and infecting others. And the solution to this problem is obviously that everyone must get the jab. This is what serious people believe. Serious people like Scott Gilmore. True Greenbird says ADL and their supporters deserve the exact same treatment they have doled out to us. That would be justice. I think it can happen within our lifetimes. William Hicks says, why would anyone be surprised that PayPal would contradict its original context? Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, et al. They've all become too big to fail. They have so many users now. Okay. Texas Feral Hog said, oh, I already read that. And lack of dignity isn't limited to U.S. athletes, writes Star Rover. Belarusian female sprinter threw a temper tantrum when asked to run in the 4x100 meter relay. Belarus kicked her off the team and she sought asylum in Poland. Yes, for some reason we're all supposed to hate Belarus now. I mean, how many people could even find that country on a map? But no, yes, we're all strongly against Belarus and whatever their terrible policies are. Metal Mike says, I have a bad feeling this episode will be removed. KMG do plan an alternative forum. Okay. And what's happening in Sweden? Sweden's a real country. Scandinavia, famously progressive. For years and years and years, we were pointed to Sweden. Look at what Sweden is doing. We should be more like the Swedes. Not anymore, unfortunately. This is from RT. As the CDC urges Americans to mask up against the Delta variant, Sweden's chief epidemiologist has argued that more data is needed about the strain's infectiousness. His mask-free nation is hovering at 0 COVID deaths per day. Anders Tegnell said on Friday that there was a lot we do not know about Delta and cautioned against drawing far-reaching conclusions about the coronavirus strain. He noted that the variant had been circulating in Sweden for quite some time with little effect, particularly in high-risk settings such as nursing homes. His comments were made in response to newly released data from the Centers for Disease Control suggesting the Delta strain is more transmissible and could potentially cause more severe illness. The New York Times and other media outlets ran stories reporting that the CDC now believes that the Delta variant is contagious as chickenpox. But this comparison didn't seem to impress Tegnell. It's difficult to say how contagious Delta is, as when it comes to chickenpox, we have been able to follow the disease for several years. The infectivity of Delta seems to be very uneven. In some cases, one person infects 100 people. Then we have other occasions when an infected person does not infect anyone at all, he told Sweden's Aftonbladet. In separate remarks, he pointed to the fact that 1/3 of the country's municipalities reported 0 new COVID cases over the past week. At the same time, there was an uptick in cases among young people in Stockholm and other large cities. And while U.S. health authorities are pressing Americans in high transmission areas to mask up, Sweden dropped its last remaining mask recommendation related to public transport on July the 1st. While Sweden's public health agency has supported measures such as social distancing and remote working, it has no recommendations for the use of face coverings in public spaces. Reviled by the media for refusing to impose harsh lockdowns, Sweden's less draconian approach to the health crisis appears to be paying off. The Scandinavian nation has recorded a total of 8 COVID-linked deaths so far this month, an average of 0.25 deaths per day. While it's possible this number will increase due to reporting lags, deaths have undoubtedly plummeted over the past several months. On June the 4th, Sweden reported 13 deaths, more than the entire month of July. And this is again from RT. The CDC has released a study backing up its decision to recommend indoor masking for both vaccinated and unvaccinated Americans. The study examined one outbreak and found 3/4 of people testing positive were vaccinated. The Centers for Disease Control revised its masking guidelines on Tuesday, urging all Americans in areas with high COVID-19 transmission to mask up when indoors, regardless of vaccination status. Mask mandates in companies, government departments, and certain local jurisdictions followed, as CDC Director Rochelle Walensky insisted the decision was made on the back of fresh scientific evidence. The CDC released that evidence on Friday in a study of 469 cases of COVID-19 that broke out in the resort town of Cape Cod, Massachusetts earlier this month. 74% occurred in fully vaccinated persons. 4 out of 5 patients hospitalized were fully vaccinated, and on average, the inoculated had completed their 2 rounds of doses only 86 days before infection. And, I read all this and I think it's just words, right? It's just words. It doesn't seem to impress anybody. You have, my enemies screaming how ignorant we are, and yet they don't seem to be able to notice certain facts. And here is a story from Natalie Winters at the National Pulse. The National Institutes of Health database tracking U.S. taxpayer-backed research grants, including the controversial award from a certain doctor with a 5-letter name, his agency to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, can no longer be accessed. When searched, the database, which itemizes the billions of taxpayer-funded grants distributed by various NIH agencies, yields no results and prompts users with an error message. Among the agencies included in the registry is the 5-letter doctors-led National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, which has come under scrutiny for funding gain-of-function research at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. The website also previously revealed NIAID-directed funds for joint research between disgraced COVID-19 investigator Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance and the Chinese government-run lab under the auspices of a nearly $3.7 million grant entitled Understanding the Risk of Bat Coronavirus. emergence. In more totalitarian news, this is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. A video out of the UK shows NHS nurses demanding to COVID test a newborn baby, claiming it's not the mother's property once outside the womb, and then threatening to report her to social services for refusing. The shocking video, which was posted to Twitter, shows a heavily pregnant mother in a hospital being lectured by nurses about how it's mandatory for the baby to be given a COVID test immediately after birth. "It's my property," states the mother, to which one of the nurses responds, "So you will while the baby's in your abdomen." "So you're saying once the baby comes out, it's not my property anymore?" "Yes, it is. I gave birth to it. It's got my blood running through it," the mother asserts. The nurse then continued to insist she explain why the baby needs a COVID test, which only serves to stress out the pregnant woman. "Do you really think I need this bullshit about COVID when I've got a risk of losing my baby?" the woman asks. The father of the baby then suggests the parent leave the hospital, stating, "They're not COVID testing my baby, end of. You can't tell me that you get to give me the say of what happens once my baby's born. I don't think so. You can't do nothing to my baby without my permission," says the mother. The nurse then responds by saying that the mother's refusal to have her baby COVID tested will be documented and passed on to social services, the safeguarding team, essentially meaning that the mother will be investigated for neglect and possibly face authorities trying to remove the baby from her care. "You're so good, aren't you, you people?" the mother sardonically states at the end of the clip, perhaps in reference to how nurses in the UK have been deified as a result of the pandemic, with people at one point being asked to participate in weekly applause sessions to show gratitude to the NHS. And again, from Paul Joseph Watson, the UN's Special Rapporteur on Torture, Niels Melzer, has requested more information on an incident in which a female anti-lockdown protester in Berlin was grabbed by the throat and brutally thrown to the ground by riot police. As we highlighted earlier, the demonstrations ended with a whopping 600 people being arrested amidst innumerable brazen examples of police brutality, including against children that were caught on camera. Germans were protesting against plans to ban unvaccinated people from a plethora of different venues, including restaurants, cinemas, and stadiums. One video clip shows an elderly protester merely attempting to walk past a police officer dressed in riot gear before he grabs her neck with both hands and throws her to the floor. Cops were obviously given orders to enforce a draconian crackdown on the protesters given their behavior throughout the day, which looked like something out of the 1930s. The clip caught the attention of Niels Melzer, a professor of international law, whose official title is United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture and Other Cruel, Inhuman, or Degrading Treatment or Punishment. "This has just been brought to my attention," tweeted Meltzer. "Can anyone provide my office with the specifics, witness statements of this incident, and whether an official investigation has been launched?" It's highly unlikely that any investigation will take place, given that riot police were clearly ordered to conduct themselves with wanton disregard for basic dignity and human rights. Another video clip showed a police officer reacting to a young boy's concern over the treatment of his mother by forcefully pushing him to the floor by his head. And, oh yes, I've mentioned this woman before, Karine Jean-Pierre, who's a Haitian lesbian. Ooh, exotic, right? And she is the principal deputy secretary spokesman for the President of the United States. With the CDC announcing a mask mandate reversal and the endless doom-mongering over the dreaded Delta variant, Americans have a lot of questions, yet the answer to all of them seems to be, do as you're told because we say so. This was in evidence again on Friday when, after the announcement that even vaccinated people can still get and transmit the Delta variant, Newsmax reporter Emerald Robinson asked the White House Principal Deputy Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre what exactly the CDC is doing to test for this. Jean-Pierre had no idea and didn't even bother to suggest that she would try to find out. She claimed she didn't even know why anyone would ask how the CDC tests for the Delta variant, or why they would bother to explain the process. Robinson pointed out that the only answers Americans are being given is because they say so, to which the deputy press secretary answered, because they are the experts. As we noted last week, Press Secretary Jen, not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki's answer to the question, if vaccines work, then why do people of the vaccine now need to wear masks, was essentially because we say so. And some sanity has broken out in my country, in the province of Alberta, and experts are furious. This is from CBC News. Many Alberta doctors are reacting with surprise and disappointment to the province's plan to relax its COVID-19 surveillance and management system, despite an increase in case numbers, the positivity rate and R value, and vaccination rates that are lagging behind other provinces. As of Thursday, quarantine for close contacts became no longer mandatory, but just recommended. Contact tracers will no longer notify close contacts, but they will continue to investigate cases in high-risk settings, such as continuing care facilities. Asymptomatic testing will no longer be recommended. On August the 16th, a further scaling down of the rules is planned. You will no longer be required to isolate if you test positive for COVID-19, but isolation will still be strongly recommended. Isolation hotels and quarantine supports will no longer be available. Testing will be available for symptomatic people only when needed to help direct patient care decisions. After August the 31st, testing for COVID-19 will be available only for patients whose symptoms are severe enough to need care in hospitals or physicians' clinics. Masking won't be required in schools. Masks will no longer be required on public transit and in most continuing care facilities. Well, bravo, Alberta. Dr. Nija Bakshi, who has worked on the COVID unit at Edmonton's Royal Alexandra Hospital throughout the pandemic, says she's worried the changes will have terrible results. The medical community is being completely gaslighted right now, she said. The idea that in 2 weeks' time we can just be done with this when we know we're not is so irresponsible. Baxi said she believes abandoning testing, isolating, and contact tracing will lead to preventable deaths. Take all that away. If the first time we know you have COVID is when we're intubating you, that's a problem. You notice how directly she goes to the threat of intubation? Members of the medical community, unhappy with the province's plan, staged demonstrations at the Alberta Legislature in Edmonton and outside the provincial offices in Calgary's McDougall Centre at noon Friday. Speaking at the rally in Calgary, Dr. Joe Vipond, an ER physician and co-founder of the Masks for Canada advocacy group, called on Dr. Dina Hinshaw, Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, to resign. Like everybody, I wanted to believe that Dr. Hinshaw had our best interests at heart, he said. But if you sign your name on a document that says I'm going to expose every Albertan, including all of our children, to unknown risks, I'm afraid she needs to resign. I don't know what else. Vipond says the province is facing a moment of history, and officials will have to answer for their decisions. The scary thing is we haven't had a single public health officer resign in response to this. We haven't had a single MLA resign as a cause of this, he said, adding that he's come to believe there are layers and layers and layers of badness driving policy decisions. Yes, Alberta has decided that the terror porn is coming to an end. Some people are very upset. Some people are very upset about that. They want the terror porn to last forever. And here's a tweet thread from Dr. Robert Malone, inventor of mRNA vaccines and RNA as a drug, bench to bedside vaccines and biologics consulting. Think through this with me, a brief narrated slide deck. Slide number 2. The key thing here is that the CDC indicates that the Delta variant has a reproduction coefficient like that of chickenpox, ergo approximately 8. Remember that number. Also that the disease severity is not much different from the original strain. Slide number 3. Note that the CDC is indicating that the protective immunity conferred by natural infection only lasts for 180 days, same as Pfizer vax. Convenient truth or fiction? Hard to say. Slide number 4. No difference in mean CT cycle threshold values in vaccinated and unvaccinated means that if you get infected, the virus replicates to the same high levels, whether or not you have been vaccinated. Slide number 5. The title says it all, and the title is Delta variant may cause more severe disease than alpha or ancestral strains. Published evidence. But is it actually true? Dr. Malone asks. Close examination of the Scottish data raises questions about this conclusion. See also later slides in this deck. Slide number 7. This one is really sneaky, full-on data manipulation. Remember that the actual row is around 8? If you factor in the actual row, to my eye, these graphs indicate that even if 100% uptake of these leaky vaccines and perfect mask compliance can't stop this virus. And he goes on. You can find the whole thing at RW Malone MD. Keep in mind, this is the inventor of mRNA technology. So he's not some redneck, some yahoo, some asshole, as Scott Gilmore would say. It just gets funnier and funnier. Or the opposite, you choose. National Institute of Health Director Dr. Francis Collins told CNN earlier today that parents with children around the age of 12 should wear face masks inside their own homes. Yes, really. During an appearance on New Day, Collins said the measure was necessary to protect kids who haven't taken the vaccine because of the Delta variant, despite him admitting that health problems in children are rare, which means recommendations of mask wearing in schools and at home, said Collins. Parents of unvaccinated kids should be thoughtful about this, and the recommendation is to wear masks there as well. I know that's uncomfortable. I know it seems weird, but it is the best way to protect your kids. Imagine being so terrorized by the grossly exaggerated threat. Imagine being such a spineless jellyfish conformist that you wear masks inside your own house. Matt Walsh responded. The NIH director says that vaccinated parents should be wearing masks at home to protect their kids who have essentially zero risk of dying from COVID. These are the ravings of a madman. This guy should be locked in an asylum. It's that crazy. Oh, yes, and there's one set of rules for, the good people, and another set of rules for the scum like us. Again, from Summit News. Barack Obama has drawn criticism for organizing a 60th birthday party at his Martha's Vineyard mansion involving some 700 people. According to reports, the party will include 475 guests, including Oprah Winfrey, George Clooney, and Steven Spielberg, with Pearl Jam playing, as well as there being around 200 staff. Many pointed out that this appears to be another case of one rule for the elite and another for everyone else. Appearing on Tucker Carlson's show, Mark Stein noted, "I couldn't go to Granny's 90th birthday, but it's perfectly fine for Barack Obama to have 500 people because our rulers are so much better than us." Obama is a great man, flying George Clooney and Oprah in. That's appropriate. I'm just going to put my mask back on and go back in my house for another 18 months, Stein added. That's the saddest observation, Tucker responded, adding, "The fierce egalitarian spirit of American dying, and that's our fault." When asked about the development during a briefing, White House Press Secretary not Jennifer, but Jen Psaki defended Obama, saying he's been a huge advocate of individuals getting vaccinated. Well, that's all that matters, right? And yes, Muriel Bowser. Man, that is an amusing name. This is from Bonchi at Red State. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser has found herself in hot water over the last few days regarding her city's new mask mandate. Originally, Bowser delayed the mandate until the day after her birthday festivities, which included a night with comedian Dave Chappelle. Given the virus doesn't care about birthdays, that seemed rather specious. But things got worse when she officiated a wedding after the mandate went into place. Her team released a statement claiming she did not break any rules, but a picture of her maskless indoors says otherwise. I don't see any food on those tables, nor do I see anyone drinking. Besides, as mayor, shouldn't she be setting a proactive example anyway? Well, according to CNN, no. In what can only be called a tortured coping session, John Berman and Brianna Keilar joined forces this morning to game things out and defend the mayor. At points, Berman seems almost distraught that Bowser is being criticized, while Keilar plays the well, who knows, role of keeping the conversation going. Actually, according to the photo I posted above, where no eating or drinking is taking place, it's pretty clear she violated her own rules. Shouldn't CNN anchors be able to ascertain that from the available evidence instead of playing dumb? Really? You're asking that about CNN anchors? I think you know better than that. Here's a piece at revolver.news. There's something remarkable happening in France right now, and it's starting to feel a little Louis XVI-ish. If you're not familiar with the French Revolution, it was an incredible period of sweeping political and societal change in France. And while there are many different circumstances and reasons which sparked the revolution, it really boiled down to three main crisis points: social, political, and economic. And one of the most formidable groups spearheading the push for reform were the peasants, or as we call them today, the working class. French peasants were furious over rapid population growth, harvest failures, physiocratic calls for modernization of agriculture, basically agricultural economists seeking to revamp farming, as well as the rising cost of dues paid out to the lords who owned the land. These issues were the driving force behind the peasants' desire to demolish feudalism in France. In short, the monarchy had gotten far too big for its britches, and the working class said enough and grabbed their pitchforks and took to the streets, and the rest is history. There was far more to it than that, but you get the picture. As it always does, history repeats itself, and once again the French working class is back in the streets with symbolic pitchforks in hands, protesting a government that's got far too big for its britches. This time around, the French working class is furious over President Emmanuel Macron's tyrannical COVID vaccine push. Macron is basically telling people you either take the jab or you lose any shot at a normal life. Threats like that didn't sit well with the hardworking people of France, and they came out to protest, hundreds of thousands of people. However, what's happening in France goes even deeper than vaccines. Many of the people who are protesting are also experiencing mounting poverty, and a country that's been overrun with refugees. This is true especially in cities like Marseille, whose citizens have a natural inherent distrust of authority and government. They're like the rebel South in the US. When you put the entire picture together, you can start to see those Louis XVI vibes I mentioned earlier. The images coming out of France are stunning, and for those of us in the United States who feel we're just a hop, skip, and a jump away from this happening in our country, it's inspiring to see brave citizens stand up and fight back against tyranny. It's quite a sight to see, and it makes you wonder as Emmanuel Macron gazes out his palace window, looking down upon the hordes of angry peasants below, if he doesn't feel a slight kinship to King Louis, another privileged man who couldn't understand the plight of his people and who ended up paying for it with his life. Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say today. As always, I don't know how much of this I can read. It was only a week ago that the American Medical Association declared that the category formerly known as sex must be removed from U.S. birth certificates, replaced, one supposes, by a tacit to be determined status in the great progressive rush to extract the human race from the animal kingdom. Of course, that's only one skirmish in the great woke Jacobin war on the moiling masses who clutter up planet Earth, cramping the style of its transhuman-seeking Uber managers, Bill Gates, Bezos, Daszak, Zuck, Jack, Elon, Klaus, and company et al. But this was the old, redoubtable, white-coated AMA, you understand, not some clack of screeching size 16, body-positive, gender-cryptic freshmen hopping up and down outside the Yale faculty lounge to gurn at the sherry-sipping toffs within. Amateur diagnosticians out there might recognize it as another symptom of the hebephrenic toxicosis infecting America's elites, especially those who work in realms supposedly based on facts, figures, and the general effort to make sense of life in our mysterious universe. This national freak show of the mind might account for the many instances of science talking out of its booty hole, led by its very personification, who is a doctor with a 5-letter name. Proud papa of SARS-CoV-2, with all its fabulous HIV and monkeypox gain-of-function bells and whistles. This doctor's mighty 20-year effort to bring forth this gift to mankind happens to coincide neatly with the collapse of advanced techno-industrial economies, a frightful condition that was already causing enough trouble in the world before COVID-19 marched in. And there's one beguiling explanation I've heard. Consular continues from Brandon Smith of altmarkets.us and others. For that hysterical campaign of recent days to jab every last holdout, the need to eliminate what's called the control group, the bunch of people who in any drug trial are given no drug or a fake shot like saline or a placebo to see if the real thing actually works. The desperate effort couldn't have been more idiotic since there was no realistic hope of gulling the remaining unvaxxed into getting a shot. Yes, indeed. Why do we need a control group? Again, I've been saying from the very beginning, I've been saying for a year and a half now, the similarities between how COVID-19 has played out and how AIDS played out, they're really, really, really remarkable. Let's go to the Daily Skeptic, aka Lockdown Skeptics, America's Delta Surge. New COVID infections are surging in America, driven by the Delta variant. The states which reopened in the spring, such as Texas, Mississippi, and Georgia, and defied the predictions of catastrophic exit waves, are now seeing surges. Florida, too, which reopened last autumn, is seeing a spike in infections, and hospital admissions are rising. Reuters takes a look at how states are responding, which is by doing remarkably little, with the appetite for restrictions, even in blue states, now that the vaccines are rolled out, seemingly much lower than in previous outbreaks. JCVI could recommend giving 16 and 17-year-olds COVID vaccine in days, says Nicola Sturgeon. Have 1,200 experts ever been proved wrong so quickly? Guido Fox reminds us today that over 1,200 so-called experts signed the declaration, cooked up by the same people behind the Jon Snow memorandum, warning of the terrible effect easing coronavirus on restrictions on July 19th would have. The declaration originally took the form of a letter in The Lancet, published July the 7th, in which 120 self-described scientists, many of them members of the independent SAGE, described Freedom Day as dangerous and premature. They cited the SAGE modeling showing that there would be 100,000 new COVID cases a day if the government went ahead with its plans and settled the dire consequences for Britain and the rest of the world. We believe the government is embarking on a dangerous and unethical experiment, and we call on it to pause plans to abandon mitigations on July the 19th, 2021, they wrote. 2 weeks on from Freedom Day, their predictions aren't holding up terribly well. According to Public Health England, the number of new daily cases fell to 21,691 today, another 5-week low. So the 1,200 signatories of the declaration exaggerated the number of daily cases that would follow Freedom Day by 500%. The Lancet letter also predicted that hospital admissions would soar as a result of Boris Johnson's recklessness. Quote, "The link between cases and hospital admissions has not been broken, and rising case numbers will inevitably lead to increased hospital admissions, applying further pressure at a time when millions of people are waiting for medical procedures and routine care," unquote. Perhaps they should have thought twice before inserting that word inevitably, because the latest data shows hospital admissions failing. Another 731 admissions were recorded by officials July the 30th, the latest data available, down 15% on the week before. And of course, our old friend Neil Ferguson said on July the 18th that it was almost inevitable that daily cases would climb to 100,000 a day if Boris went ahead with the unlocking the following day, and added that the real question was whether they would reach $200,000 a day or more, and warned of a significant burden on our healthcare system, out by 1,000%, which is actually pretty modest by Ferguson's standards. As Guido Fox says, Guido can't remember a time 1,200 so-called experts were proven so wrong in one fell swoop. Boris's decision to go ahead with Freedom Day is the first time I can think of in the past 16 months when he stuck to his guns in the face of wildly apocalyptic claims from various experts about the consequences of letting it rip, their phrase for giving our freedoms back. On every previous occasion, because he's done exactly as these gloomsters have asked, they haven't been proved wrong. Admittedly, locking down 3 times hasn't stopped the UK from having one of the worst COVID death tolls in Europe, and Sweden's excess deaths in 2020 were lower than ours in spite of not locking down. But the crystal ball gazers have been able to argue that things would have been so much worse if we hadn't locked it down. Yet this time, finally, Boris ignored their doom-mongering, and as a result, they've been proved spectacularly and humiliatingly wrong. Will this experience stiffen Boris's backbone the next time he's prevailed upon by the government's scientific advisors, sundry public health experts, and the chin wobblers in the cabinet to lock down again, which really is inevitable? We can but hope. New York City introduces vaccine passports for indoor dining. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, has announced that later this month, only those who've been double jabbed will be able to dine inside at restaurants, enter gyms, or go to the theater. Stop Press. New York City Councilman Joe Borelli points out this will mean that 69% of Blacks, 58% of Latinos, and a majority of Bronx residents won't be able to eat in a restaurant or go to a gym. Yes, it's always useful to mention this because it's not exactly a secret that the group in the United States most hesitant about being vaccinated are Black people, then Hispanics, then white people. Black people don't want to get vaccinated, I suppose, because they don't trust the government. But strangely, people like Scott Gilmore, other smart people, it's white people, particularly white Christian conservatives, who are the people who are not getting vaccinated. Well, we know that that isn't true. But they just keep insisting, yes, everyone hates Christian conservatives, right? Queues at Heathrow Airport are a quarter-mile long thanks to pandemic. Departure queues at Heathrow Airport up to quarter-mile long thanks to the fact that 25% of staff have been pinged by the NHS COVID app. Huge queues have built up at Heathrow Airport amid a suspected COVID outbreak among staff. It has been reported frustrated passengers have been stuck waiting for hours at the London airport today. Some reported tension within the queues, with people jostling and pushing just to get into the terminal. The lack of social distancing has led to concerns among some that the virus could spread as crowded people wait to get on their flights. Problem with the e-gates and sickness among Border Force staff are behind the delays, the Times reports. PregCOV, new trial to study potential side effects of COVID vaccination on pregnant women and babies. Ibiza looking to put together snitch squad to report on lockdown rule breakers. Change to NHS COVID app, too little, too late, say business leaders. And that's what we have from Lockdown Skeptics. I noticed that Alex Berenson hasn't updated his Twitter account for several days. I wonder if that's because he's afraid that whatever he prints now, he's going to be kicked off Twitter permanently. In the meantime, though, one can still read him on Substack. He posted this today. Quick update on the Israeli vaccine data. It's bad and getting worse. I have a bigger stack planned on the Pfizer trial results, but Israel has gone back to being more transparent, and the new data are now too bad not to highlight. A reminder, Israel and the United Kingdom were the two major countries that vaccinated earliest and most aggressively, but they are much better at providing data than the United States. They provide updates every day, which limits their opportunities to manipulate it. Israel is now segmenting the number of serious cases by vaccinated and unvaccinated and by age on its primary data dashboard. You can use Google Translate to check it for yourself. It's actually pretty straightforward. So here's the chart of new serious cases each day. As you can see, new serious cases have risen tenfold since the beginning of July, from roughly 5 a day to over 40 in the last week. The overall number of patients has soared too, from 30 to more than 200. But how many of those people are vaccinated? The vast majority. Israel has broken out the data in various ways at various times, but throughout July, most new patients were vaccinated. In an effort to play down that reality, Israel has begun to provide data comparing rates of serious illness in older people who were not vaccinated and those who were. And those show that as of now, unvaccinated people are still becoming seriously ill significantly more frequently than those that aren't. But that comparison hides a very big problem. Israel did an excellent job convincing people over 60 to be vaccinated. Only about 1 person in 15 in that age range didn't receive at least one dose. Fewer than 1 in 10 is not fully vaccinated. Why should you care? Because the tiny fraction of older people who are unvaccinated in Israel at this point are almost certainly materially different than the vast majority who are. As far as I know, the Israeli government has not broken out the differences. But given the pressure to vaccinate, a significant number of those older unvaccinated people are likely simply too sick to tolerate the vaccine, especially those over 80, where overall vaccination rates are even higher. But if they are too sick to tolerate the vaccine, they are obviously at much higher risk from COVID than the vaccinated. In other words, ability and propensity to be vaccinated is likely a marker for overall health. Researchers know this is true of the influenza vaccine. Once they adjust for the fact that older people who get the vaccine are healthier to start with than those who don't, the advantage the vaccine seems to offer mostly disappears. So the comparison between vaccinated and unvaccinated isn't useful. What is useful is examining the trend among serious illness in older vaccinated people, and it is terrible. The rate of cases has risen 12-fold in a month. On July the 4th, fewer than 1 older vaccinated person in 100,000 became seriously ill. Today, the rate is 10 in 100,000. Remember, comparing unvaccinated and vaccinated at this point hardly matters. The dark green line is the one that matters. And though we cannot be sure what will happen next, it is worth noting that rates of serious illness among the vaccinated are now as high as they were among the unvaccinated only 2 weeks ago. Perhaps that's why the Israeli government is now predicting a further quadrupling of new serious cases by the end of August. A quadrupling would represent 800 serious cases, approaching the peak of the winter surge, which was itself probably fueled by a spike in cases following the first vaccine dose and far more than at this time last year. And remember, Israel cannot blame the unvaccinated for this spike. Around 85% of adults over 30 are fully vaccinated. That's well above the range experts said would provide herd immunity. And yet, instead of pulling back and at least considering a pause on vaccinations as it digests the disaster of the last month, Israel is going the other way, pushing a third dose on the elderly. Meanwhile, the cry to mandate or quasi-mandate vaccinations in the United States is only getting louder. What on earth is going on? And, okay, we talked about Omama's birthday. Let's talk about classical music. Apparently there's a big problem with classical music, which is that racial minorities don't seem to like it, although a lot of Asians like classical music. There are a great number of Asian violinists and pianists, to give one example. Well, Black people don't like classical music. I'm sure there's a few. But it's not something that Black people tend to enjoy. And why do they have to enjoy it? They get to decide what they like and what they don't like. So they don't like classical music. Classical music is just a tiny amount of the money spent on entertainment in the United States. But apparently something must be done about this. Heather McDonald writes in City Journal, classical music is under racial attack. Orchestras and opera companies are said to discriminate against Black musicians and composers. The canonical repertoire, the product of a centuries-long tradition of musical expression, is allegedly a function of white supremacy. I have to jump in here and say this is absolutely hilarious. Orchestras and opera companies are said to discriminate against Black musicians and composers. Well, some decades ago, the practice of blind auditions was introduced, that musicians played behind a curtain. So you couldn't see whether they were male or female, or whether they were white or Black or Asian or whatever. But Black people are now complaining that blind auditions are racist. Why are they racist? Because apparently not enough Black people are being employed based on blind auditions. Well, they're good enough, goes the argument. And of course, opera companies and symphony orchestras, they don't like that argument, they're good enough. They prefer the best, which apparently is racist. Heather McDonald continues, not one leader in the field has defended Western art music against these charges. Their silence is emblematic. Other supposed guardians of Western civilization, whether museum directors, humanities professors, or scientists, have gone AWOL in the face of similar claims, lest they themselves be denounced as racist. The campaign against classical music is worth examining in some detail, for it reveals the logic that has been turned against nearly every aspect of Western culture over the last year. The crusade began within days of the death of George Floyd in late May 2020. Floyd died during an arrest in Minneapolis. Cell phone video captured Officer Derek Chauvin, since convicted of murder, keeping his knee on the prone Floyd's neck and back for nearly 8 minutes while Floyd repeated, "I can't breathe." Riots against police brutality broke out across the U.S. Institution after institution pledged to fight the structural racism that Floyd's death supposedly represented. The classical music profession deemed itself implicated in Floyd's death. On June 1st, 2020, the League of American Orchestras issued a statement confessing that for decades it had tolerated and perpetuated systemic discrimination against Black people, discrimination mirrored in the practices of orchestras and throughout our country. The League was committed to dismantling its role in perpetuating the systems of inequity that continue to oppress Black people and expected its member orchestras to respond in kind. The response was immediate. The Hartford Symphony Orchestra apologized for its history of inaction to effectively confront the racist systems and structures that have long oppressed and marginalized Black musicians, composers, and communities. The Seattle Opera announced that it would continue to prioritize anti-racism and make amends for causing harm. Opera Omaha sent a message to its Black community, quote, "We know that you are exhausted and recognize that we will never fully understand the depth of your suffering. We know that part of your exhaustion comes from the heartbreak of our silence, inaction, and half measures," unquote. Seriously? Yes. What is bugging Black people in the United States? Apparently classical music. Yes. Black people are exhausted because classical musicians and orchestras have done something, apparently. Really? I don't think so. Every communication that the opera sends out now concludes with the tagline, "We will listen more than we speak, but will not be silent in the face of injustice." Black musicians produced manifestos complaining of their mistreatment at the hands of white administrators and conductors. Weston Sprott, a trombonist with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, along with three musicians from three other ensembles, declared in the New York Times that the reason that there are not Black artists in orchestras is racism. 6 Black opera singers made a YouTube video about opera racism at the invitation of the Los Angeles Opera. LA Opera's president, Christopher Kolsch, introduced the discussion. "I come to you today as the white male leader of this institution," he said, staring dazedly at the camera. LA Opera was committing anew to self-examination and to do our part to heal wounds that are hundreds of years old. Most of the discussion centered on Floyd's death, but tenor Russell Thomas also told of being rebuked for routinely showing up late and for talking on his cell phone during rehearsals for an unnamed opera. "They were putting me in my place," Thomas said, although his behavior was the result of his uncle dying in a car accident, he maintained. Only a Black singer would be denied a basic amount of consideration. Disappointments were likewise chalked up to racism. Soprano Lauren Michel claimed that the reason she has not had a more prominent career in the United States was that she was Black. "The truth is, I'm an award-winning international opera singer who has only been hired once at an A house in the United States," she wrote on her blog. Michelle did not address why her contemporaries, such as Angel Blue, Pretty Yende, Eric Owens, and Lawrence Brownlee, have sung in A houses. Music conservatories admitted their racial backwardness. The Juilliard School's president, Damian Wutzel, and Juilliard's director of Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Initiatives pledged that the school would become a community that not only rejects racism, but that is actively anti-racist, working to tear down systemic racism and injustice. As part of that work, the school created a Blacks-only Zoom space for healing. Juilliard's head of music theory wrote his colleagues that it's high time the whiteness of music theory is examined, critiqued, and remedied. The classical music press, presiding over an art form whose salience shrinks by the year, produced a torrent of commentary, explaining to readers why they should view classical music as culpably white. In September 2020, New York critic Alex Ross apologized for being a white American, writing about a world that is blindingly white, both in its history and its present. The love of classical music on the part of 19th century Americans and patrons and performance was a smokescreen for white supremacy, Ross suggested. For good measure, he invoked a standard from the student gripe portfolio to buttress his argument for classical music racism, Mozart's portrayal of the Moor monostatos in The Magic Flute. The lead reviewer for the New York Times, Anthony Tomasini, urged that orchestra auditions no longer take place behind a screen in order to address the appalling racial imbalance in orchestral ranks. Currently, musicians' identities are concealed by a screen through most, if not all, stages of an orchestral audition to prevent favoritism or bias, a process known as a blind audition. But color blindness is now regarded as discriminatory since it favors merit over race. Fellow Times critic Joshua Barone called for reforming opera's culture by placing anti-racism front and center. A Washington Post critic alleged that systemic racism runs like rot through the structures of the classical music world. Vox explained that Beethoven's Fifth Symphony was a symbol of white male superiority and importance. BBC Magazine columnist Tom Service also purported to deconstruct the alleged greatness of the canonical repertoire, the link between patriarchal power in the West and the fact that the classical canon is made up of look-alike faces of great men is more than coincidental. Slate complained that referring to well-known composers only by their last names exacerbates classical music's exclusionary practices. The Louisville Orchestra, for example, had advertised the performance of a Beethoven symphony and the debut of a composition memorializing Breonna Taylor by Davoni Teens and Ije Dudone. To assume that Davoni Teens and Ije Dudone need to be full named, whereas Beethoven does not, replicates classical music's centuries of systematic prejudice, exclusion, sexism, and racism, according to Slate. Note to readers, if you have not heard of Tynes and Dudone, you are not alone. Classical music radio announcers and executives instructed their audience to hear inequity in the cascade of human feeling coming from their speakers. Garrett McQueen, then an announcer for an American public media, told a Composers Forum roundtable in June of 2020, "You are complicit in racism every time you listen to Handel's Messiah." Academia, the source of today's race obsession, weighed in with gusto. The Music Library Association decried its complicity in the marginalization and extrajudicial killing of people of color. What? How are people sawing away on violins or playing trumpets? What does this have to do with extrajudicial killing of people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous individuals? A music theory professor from Hunter College, Philip Ewell, received widespread acclaim for his denunciations of classical music racism. Ewell has whiteness on the brain. During the Floyd riots, Ewell compiled a glossary of music-related euphemisms for whiteness. Quote, authentic, canonic, civilized, classics, conventional, core, European, function, fundamental, genius, German, great, maestro, opus, piano, seminal, sophisticated, titanic, towering, traditional, and Western. Since everything is about race, according to Ewell, anytime you seem not to be talking about race, referring to someone's piano skills, say, you are actually talking about race by dint of ignoring the topic. Connoisseurs of deconstruction will recognize the rhetorical technique here of turning an absence into a supposed presence. You will also engage in the mandatory Beethoven takedown. The only reason we deem the 9th century a masterpiece is Beethoven's whiteness and maleness, he wrote on his blog. Beethoven's 9th Symphony is no more a masterwork than Esperanza Spalding's 12 Little Spells, Ewell insisted. Spalding is a jazz singer. 12 Little Spells is an album of experimental jazz numbers about 16 body parts and functions. The texts, "Our eyeballs are hollow but presently hold shape around a gooey filling," are not the equivalent of Schiller's Ode to Joy. To place Spalding's slight compositions at the same level of complexity, emotional force, and historical significance as the 9th Symphony is objectively ludicrous. Ewell backed up his aesthetic relativism with an attempted logical refutation of Beethoven's greatness. To state that Beethoven was any more than, say, above average as a composer is to state that you know all music written on planet Earth 200 years ago when Beethoven was active as a composer, which no one does. Judgments of greatness imply no such encyclopedic knowledge, however. We may deem a meal great, for example, without implying that we have eaten every other meal available on the planet at that moment. Ewell's whiteness obsession is standard in music departments now. What catapulted him to ironic status was his denunciation of the early 20th century music theorist Heinrich Schenker. Schenker developed an influential system of analysis that identifies the most important elements of a musical phrase in order to explain the phrase's emotional impact and its role within a work's thematic development. In a keynote address at the November 2019 Music Theory Conference, Ewell argued that Schenker's ranking of notes and harmonies within a composition is merely a stand-in for a white supremacist ranking of the races. The white racial frame of Schenkerian analysis has kept blacks from becoming music theorists, Ewell maintained. Are there a lot of blacks who would like to become music theorists? There's not a lot of fame associated with being music theorists, and I don't think there's very much money involved either. But are black people beating down the doors demanding to become music theorists? Ewell's speech was ecstatically received. Alex Ross's September 2020 article on racism in classical music amplified Ewell's white racial frame thesis further. And when a few music theorists dissented from that thesis, Ewell became a symbol of the field's oppressive whiteness. With such near unanimity regarding classical music's racial sins, it is no wonder that the demands issued to compensate for those sins have been breathtaking in ambition. Those coming from the influential Sphinx organization were typical. Sphinx has been advocating for race consciousness in classical music since 1997. It holds separate competitions for young Black and Hispanic musicians, supports minority-only ensembles, and provides color-coded training and financial assistance. Since the Floyd riots, it has been churning out a series of diversity demands more extensive than any it had previously proposed. In its first set of demands, it opened with a call for orchestras, opera companies, and conservatories to examine the supremacist logic embedded in traditional Western art and music / repertoire. After impugning the Western music tradition, Sphinx then laid down racial quotas for that allegedly white supremacist activity. At least 20% of soloists each concert season should be Black and Latinx. 40% of candidates for auditions and administrative jobs should be Black and Latinx. And 20% of the repertoire performed each season should be reflective of Black and Latinx composers. At least 10% of every musical budget should be spent compensating for past racial inequities in programming. What such compensation might mean was not explained. Sphinx's next set of demands was published in the New York Times in September 2020. The numbers had changed, suggesting a certain arbitrariness in how they were computed. Sphinx president Afa Dworkin. There are so many of these Dworkins about. So many Dworkins working to destroy society. Writing with Anthony McGill, principal clarinet of the New York Philharmonic, now insisted that 15% of a music organization's budget, up from the previous 10, should go toward addressing systemic racism. What that meant was again left unspecified. This 15% reallocation should continue for the next decade. The diversity component in every audition was down to 25% from 40%. Excuse me. Yes, welcome to the crime zone. The diversity component in every audition was down to 25% from 40%, but if an orchestra or conservatory did not rustle up the requisite diversity quotient, it could not select a winning candidate, no matter how qualified the finalist. In January 2021, Sphinx issued more audition guidelines. Traditionally, if a musician is of a known high caliber, having played with another prestigious orchestra, say, he may skip the early stages of an audition and go right to the semifinals or finals, which may still be blind. Sphinx now proposed that those automatic advancements include a whopping 25% or more of Black and brown musicians. This is mathematically impossible, and Sphinx should know it, since it has been decrying the low numbers of minorities in orchestras for 2 decades. Blacks make up 1.8% of all orchestral musicians, which includes non-competitive community ensembles. The larger and more competitive the orchestra is, the fewer Blacks it has. Filling at least 25% of all automatic advancement slots with minorities from top-ranked orchestras is not doable, even assuming that there were so many automatic advancements in each audition to set aside 25% of them at any type of quota. It's a very long article, and that's as much as I'm going to read. I would just say I have some advice for you, that if you're interested in classical music, buy the CDs and the DVDs and the Blu-rays, because shortly every single orchestra and opera company in the United States and Canada is going to be wrecked, deliberately wrecked. Yep. Oh, well, they're not so good at playing. Well, that doesn't matter anymore. Diversity über alles. I think I'm going to wrap it up at this point. On Theater Thursday, I'm going to be talking about David Robert Mitchell's 2018 film, Under the Silver Lake. And on the book club on Friday, I'm going to be talking about Lafcadio Kern and his writings about Japan. If you like the show, so you're living in the nice part of town, Kevin says, Metal Mike. Canadians can be a bit smug, said Birkin Sultanov. Not digging the chair today? Hard to get comfortable? Well, it's 80 degrees here, which may not sound very warm to a lot of Americans, but for Victoria, it's extraordinarily hot, and I cannot bear the heat. So I think that explains it. If you like the show or any part of it, I appreciate if you click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, which I could really, really use at this time, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace at hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations can be made directly via Interac at kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.